and welcome back to the Little Woman podcast. Today's comment shout out goes to Red, who says, I have been recently getting into classic literature, and I thought I was the only one who thought Friedrich was way better than Laurie. All my friends judged it by the 2019 movie without even reading the book, and it's a freaking shame. Their characters deserve so much better. For somebody who never married, Louisa May Alcott thought about marriage a lot. In the 19th century, most people married because of money, and when Louisa was younger, she considered marrying for money, so she could lift her family away from poverty. And Louisa's mother had told her that she would rather see her married to a poor man and to be happy. In Little Woman, it is Amy who considered marrying for money so she can financially help her family. People still today judge Amy for that. Should they actually be judging Louisa May Alcott? I don't know. In Little Woman, Mommy says to the girls that she rather sees them to marry poor men for love than to be rich and miserable. When I read Little Woman 2019 film guide, Greta Gerwig was criticizing the previous Little Woman movies that they put too much emphasis on the romance. And there was a whole sequence in the book where she was making fun of the Under the Umbrella chapter and Jo and Friedrich's relationship. And in the movie, she puts way more emphasis on girls wanting to make money and not to care about anything else. And then she wondered why Jo rejected, quote, rich and handsome Laurie. That is a huge contradiction with The Little Woman, the novel, and the entire time period, since Louisa May Alcott encourages young women to marry for love instead of money. And Louisa was not a happy spinster in her diaries from the time when she was in her mid-40s, and she writes how alone she is and how she envies her sister's marriages. Louisa was making about $2 million a year at that time. That's a lot of money today. She was one of the wealthiest women in America, so money did not make her happy. Not at all. In this episode, Christina and I will be analyzing the different marriages in Little Woman. It does seem that Louisa herself had similar goals when it came to marriage when she was younger. I have often also wondered how much the relationship that she had with real-life Laurie, Lady Wisniewski, affected on her views about marriage, because she did seriously consider marriage with him and thought about the relationship a lot. He was a lot younger and apparently had proposed to his previous employee while wooing Louisa, and I think Louisa had a good reasons to reject him. If you want to hear more about Laddie and Henry, check out the episode Love and Sex in Real Woman. This is a quote from an article that Louisa wrote, quote, if love comes as it should come, accept it in God's name and be worthy of his best blessing. If it never comes, then in God's name reject the shadow of it, for that can never satisfy a hungry heart. Louisa says that only love that is worth is based on true feelings, that love that is based to patch loneliness is self-deceiving and not real. If you think about the 2019 version of Little Woman, it gives a very cynical view of romantic love. Gerwig says that Jo and Laurie could be a great couple and yet completely erases Laurie's toxic behavior towards Jo. That is in the book, and then there is the other narrative that Jo is really Louisa who hated marriage. But as you just heard, she wanted to marry herself and envied her sister's romances. If you just show Laurie being in love with Jo and don't give the actual reason why she rejected him, you will never see why Amy and Laurie and Jo and Friedrich's relationships were written to be those that work. Now we have a way lighter views on marriage than it was for Victorians, and getting a divorce was difficult. And Louisa saw lots of very unhappy marriages. They were made because of money, but both of her sisters married for love and it worked out for them. Louisa did pay attention to her sisters' marriages, and she writes how they, quote, blossomed in their marriages. If you ask me, there has not been nearly enough research made about the marriages in Little Woman and how they fit with Louisa's own observations about marriage. I talked with someone in a Henry Thoreau discussion group actually, and they pointed out that there is this quote pop culture idea in movies what love is, and it's based on these very shallow ideas what romanticized Jo and Laurie represent in the films. Whereas the transcendentalists like Louisa May Alcott, they saw love more as a spiritual experience. It doesn't really matter how different or how similar you are with the other person. What really matters is how your differences and similarities complement the other person. And this is something that Louisa May Alcott really mastered the way she crafted the marriages in Little Woman and many of her other novels too. This Small Umbrella in the Rain, Little Woman podcast, marriages in Little Woman and why they work.
Remember, you said, I'm pretty sure it was you, where you said that Meg and John were the more grounded type, Laurie and Amy are the romantic type, and then Jo and Friedrich somehow are a mix of the two. Like, they're grounded in the sense of like what is the realistic, but like they are deeply romantic with each other, and that it carries on through the year.
One of my friends said that always writing all these things to her journals, how she was lonely and envied her sister's marriages and how she wanted to get married. It was not something that she could say to the public if she had this fear that people pity her because she was a spinster, but also that during that time, it would not be something even appropriate to tell that I'm not married because I'm lonely. She was always afraid that she would lose her face. I've been reading this now from a couple of different sources that she paid Daddy Wisniewski some money that he would not go to the press and chat about their, I don't know if it was affair or a kiss or something more. But I think it's very clear that Louisa was afraid that people would find out that she had affairs with men.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the Alcott studies that I read that Louisa and her publisher, they were the ones who came up with the spinster image so that they could sell her books, especially for the children, because the children were her target audience. Even though nowadays a lot of people see Little Woman more as a young adult novel, or some people even as an adult novel, but back then it was really targeted for children. I don't think Little Woman is necessarily a children's book because I think it opens up a lot better when you have some news behind. Right. But I think it explains a lot about why people have so many misconceptions about Louisa and marriage. There is a very big difference between this public image that Louisa and her publisher, Thomas Niles, created for her so that they could sell her works. And then there is this private Louisa who had these crushes to her older male friends. And I think she did fall in love to Henry David Thoreau, and she had a fling with Daddy Wisniewski. She was a very passionate woman who did want career and a romance and marriage. I also read the early Alcott schoolers because they didn't really want to make the difference between the two. They cut out all these certain parts about her diaries and didn't include them into the public statements about Louisa May Alcott. It's really interesting when you go back to the Louisa May Alcott research and how in different time periods certain elements have been removed from Louisa May Alcott studies. I think I read that in the 70s when the 1970 series came out, there was this big anti-Friedrich and anti-Laurie movement in Alcott research because of that series, the way it portrayed Laurie and Friedrich. And I kind of understand that because I don't think that series does a really good job with portraying the male characters, but it's also a really shame in terms of the research if you take this very angry feminist approach to the male characters.
The BBC version you're talking about, right?
Yeah, the one where Friedrich is really angry and he finds out that Jo has been writing sensational stories.
Yeah, that one is a very unusual version. I also remember that they did, like, Mr. March felt a little weird. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
like, that doesn't seem right to his character to just kind of be oblivious like that. Because the one scene that stands out particularly is when Friedrich comes to visit and he's like, oh my God, it's you. And like takes into like the study and just doesn't even realize that like, oh, maybe Jo wanted to see Friedrich. Like, I was like, that seems so totally not in character with Mr. March. And like, I don't know. It was like, it is a very unusual version. And not to say that the BBC couldn't do a version of Little Women, because obviously they're British and more American, but like it almost felt at times like it was making fun of it. Like, they kind of had moments where I was just like, I don't know if you're making fun of the story or not. Like, there was something very off about it, which I almost felt it was a shame because it does have some good moments. Like, I think the actress that plays Jo is good. Like, she could have been a really good Jo. She seemed to have that same sort of characteristic and had a really good Laurie proposal scene. I thought that was actually, again, one of the closest to how the novel plays it out. And you really do kind of sit there like, Laurie, you little jerk, like, just leave her alone. It's tough. And that one, for anyone that doesn't know, because I took the time to do it, that is so far to date the only version that has an actual German Friedrich.
Half German, half English, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to find my thing, the post that I made, because one day I was just so bored. I was like, let me just see how many of them are actual German versus. Yeah, so I found it. For anyone that is curious, Paul Lucas from the 33 version is Hungarian. Rossano Brazzi from the 49 version is Italian. Then Frederick Jaeger from the 1971 that we're discussing is German. Shatner from 78 two-parter is Canadian. Gabriel Byrne from 1994 is Irish. Mark Stanley from the Masterpiece Theater miniseries is English. Ian Bowen from the modern day one is American, and Louis Garrel is French. I was just curious one day. I was just like, let me just research this. And I got to say, as unusual as the 1970 version is, it had that going for him. But I was like, that's a shock. Like seriously, only out of all of those, and that's mainstream versions, one of them is the closest to how the book version is. It's very, very bizarre.
Yeah, it's not very loyal to the book. I think really good job with Amy and Laurie in Europe. The dialogue was very close to the book, but then it also had that scene of Laurie catfishing Meg, which also in the book, but then I got so mad because they framed it to be Meg's fault. That none today because it was all Laurie's fault.
Right, and it's not fair to say that's Meg's fault when why would she ever suspect that, Laurie would ever do such a thing? As harmless as his other tricks before, she probably was just like, whatever, but that was not harmless. That was a very mean thing to do, and that's like the moment where you're kind of like, Laurie, that was very low of you to go that way. But again, I'm not a fan of any version that has an adult playing Amy, and I think as good as she was, like you said, when she's more an adult and they're in Europe, I think that's a good sequence. But as a child, she just that actress got on my nerves. I couldn't stand listening to her screech that way. So it was the same thing with that Amy in the 1978 version. It just was like, oh my God, just grow up. You are a grown up, so act like it.
You cannot have an adult woman playing a child without making the character looking immature. It happens every time, every single time.
And I do say I give props to the 1949 version that obviously when you look at them, Margaret O'Brien is younger than Elizabeth Taylor. So in that one, they actually switched it to be that Amy is older than Beth. While that is not accurate, I can appreciate that they did try to accommodate it so that way it doesn't look wrong. Like, again, you can't convince me that Margaret O'Brien is older than Elizabeth Taylor. So far, only the 94 version and the 2008 modern day version actually did do a split between child Amy and adult Amy. And it makes Amy so much more sympathetic when you kind of look at her like she's just a little girl. She wants to be with the older sisters, which is something I relate to. I mean, I'm the youngest of 4 and my sister is 5 years older than me. So I always kind of had that feeling of like, can I come soon? It's like, no, you're not old enough for this. No, you can't because, this is something that only, let's just say if I was 10 and she was 15, like, sorry, only teenagers can do this or you're not old enough for that. Like, so I definitely can identify with Amy of that feeling of, but I want to join too. It's not fair. Like, and you feel bad because you're just like, no, she's just a little kid. But when you do get like an older actress playing the part and doing the whole book burning scene, it doesn't feel as sympathetic to Amy, and you do have that sort of feeling of like, well, Jo's right to be mad at her for as long as she has because she's an adult and she should know better. Whereas with the little kid, it's like, it was really bad that she did that, but you got to understand she is a little kid. Be a little bit more forgiving towards her. I don't know why they feel the need to. The only thing I can think of is that they kind of, I'm assuming in general, Hollywood, when they do like cast a older actress to play a younger person to try to carry out, is that they think that somehow you're going to lose momentum or you'll lose something in that. But I'm like, I can't buy, as much as I do like Lily James, I can't buy Lily James being a young Natasha in War and Peace. She's a little bit too mature looking to be a 12-year-old. If you told me 16, I'd be like, that's a stretch, but whatever, I can buy that more than 12. I don't really understand it, and it really loses a lot of the character for me.
One of the things that came out about Amy in the book is that when she was 12, what she really wanted was Jo's approval. Well, she wanted Jo to like her. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think Jo also resented that Amy was so feminine. And there's nothing wrong with her being feminine either. One of the things that I really liked about part 2 was his description how Jo and Amy would fight about something and then they would burst out laughing when they realized that it's really stupid, this arguing they're having. Amy wasn't anti-Jo or Jo wasn't anti-Amy. We're just sisters.
Again, I sort of draw parallels between my sister and myself. Like, I don't know if we were very close when we were younger. And it's the same with like no matter who you are sibling-wise, whether you're 2 boys, 2 girls, 1 boy, one girl type situation. But when you reach a certain age, you're like, I want to do the things I want to do and not have to spend all my time with my little sister or little brother. The younger sibling kind of feels like you're leaving me behind. But once you get to a certain age, you kind of almost reconnect. Like, I feel like I'm definitely closer with my sister now because now we're both adults and we both have that better understanding of each other. And not that there was never any love between us in all those years. There was. It does in a way. And I think in general, children are unintentionally selfish. We just kind of go like, I want to do what I want to do at this age. And I don't care if my little sister wants to come along. It's what I want to do. Why should she? She can't come along and I'm not going to accommodate for that because I've earned my years to be able to do this and I'm not going to be held back by her. So yeah, I don't think that it was ever, like you said, anti-Jo, anti-Amy against each other. It's just whatever the points they were in their lives, it just did not lead them to be as close as they were. But as they gotten older, they sort of understand themselves better as well as each other. And that helped to create a more closer and more developed relationship where they can actually be more like friends. I think that people tend to pit them together because they both do so well with Beth. Between the two of them, they have a little bit more conflict. They grow out of it. And particularly, I felt with the Gerwig version, they put more attention on Jo and Amy's relationship and how it's symbolism because they're so different and contrasting each other. And it's just like, I don't know. I don't feel like there's that much thought into it. Just in general, that's just the nature of how sibling relationships are. You start off being like, oh, my little sister, my big sister. And then you grow into that age of, I want to do more of the adult things. And I don't want to be around my little sibling as much as I used to. And then sort of reconnecting because like, oh yeah, like now that we're sort of closer in the sense of age mentality, we can do those things together. So yeah, I think people overblow the Jo and Amy relationship as if it is this full-on sibling rivalry, which it really is not at all.
I was really surprised because when I did the research on Louisa May Alcott's relationship with May Alcott, yeah, there was some sibling rivalry between them when they were younger. Like I said about the Angry Feminist and the 70s version, I think a lot of the Alcott schoolers, well, not necessarily Alcott schoolers, but public in general, when they are interpreting male women in different times, they always tend to go to TV version or a film version instead of the book. When I was doing the research about the sisters, it really boggled my mind that there were so many Alcott who were writing how, oh, Louisa envied May when she was living in Europe and she was hanging out with Larry Wisniewski. Then I read his letters between Louisa and May. It seems that they both were fed up with him. And I also got this feeling that not only had Louisa given him money, I don't know if it was for, shutting him down for their thing or whatever it was, or if she wanted to help him financially, I don't know. It seemed that May might have also borrowed him money because she writes in a letter to Louisa that he never paid his debt back. And people are always saying, oh, yeah, you really shouldn't hate Laurie that much. I don't hate Laurie. Laurie, he grows in his relationship with Amy, and I really like that. That's a big part of his character. But I can't deny the fact that all these real-life Lauries, Vladimir Wisniewski and Al Whitman, was also a friend of the Alcotts. Laddie was an adult man, and he seems to have been borrowing money from his wealthy friends and didn't really seem to be very reliable or very interested in work. And then I think May also wrote about Alf that, well, he seems to be a bit lost in life and doesn't really have a direction. And that sounds a lot like Laurie. I read so many bad studies about Louisa and May and how they were fighting, quote unquote, fighting over Laddie, who was living in Paris at the same time as May. Then it doesn't really align with the letters that the sisters wrote to each other. And why on earth would they fighting about this guy? I think Louisa wrote Laurie to be this aspiring character who actually grows out from the disillusions that he has about artist life. It's not just Laddie and Alf who were models for Laurie. You can find it from all these different books that Louisa read and all these young men who she might hang out with. I think it's really dismissive for both the literal Jo and Amy and then the actual Louisa May Alcott and May Alcott to present them as these sisters who just were having this love and hate relationship and only thought about this guy who actually wasn't really great. I actually really like Laurie in Ghost Boys and Middle Man when he's helping Matt and he brings all these poor boys to Jo. He also always says that Jo was the one who raised him. Mm-hmm. He doesn't speak about Jo as his first love or girlfriend. I just don't like the romanticization of the young Laurie. I think a lot of these Alcott schoolers who try to present Jo and Amy, these people who just fight over Laurie, it's not based on the book, it's based on the adaptations. I say the same about the people who say that, oh, Jo and Friedrich just argue. Well, they don't argue in the book. They argue in pretty much every single adaptation.
I always have felt that out of all of them, that Jo and Friedrich will be the ones that have the best communication skills because, like you said, they never argue or yell at each other. They always just somehow manage to discuss the situation. And I think people also sort of think that it's sort of like, they just know that, oh, Jo has a temper. And they think she carries that throughout, that she's old, that she always has a temper. But like, she knows how to control it by the time she goes to New York. And most of the adaptations will have it kind of like play out as if like, oh, there's that temper of hers. But like, no, she kind of learned how to control it thanks to like Marmee and even Mr. March when he comes back. But it's also not in Friedrich's nature to be argumentative either. He's not a temperamental type of guy. And as we find, Jo has tempers when she reacts to something negatively in a very strong way. Like, we never see her yell at Beth. She never yelled at Beth for anything, even if they do disagree, because why would you yell at Beth? She's the least offending person ever. And I feel if I had to compare Friedrich to any of the sisters, it would be to Beth. He is a very quiet, gentle soul who is, unlike Beth, is able to, when the moment needs to arise, he will stand up and say, no, I don't agree with that. He's more willing to put himself out there if the situation comes to it. He'll kind of sit there and be like, I may not agree, but that's fine. But if something like, as we see in the novel, when they're at the symposium and someone says something in regard to religion, that was like that moment where he's like, sorry, I need to stand up and say something, but in the nicest way possible with strong facts to hold him behind. And that's when Jo gets an extra boost of respect for Friedrich. So it would be very surprising and almost negative towards Jo's character to say, one, that this temper that she's been working on all of a sudden comes back, and to say that she would yell at someone who is so unoffensive. Unlike with like Laurie, who like yells and says these very negative things towards her, does she respond negatively? Whereas with Friedrich, he approaches it in a very kind and more gentler way. Act that there way is no reason for her to respond in that. And that why way. Would Jo? Yeah, I don't really. I don't really understand why people feel
Amy
that it's so important to have them argue when
Amy's
that's not.
Very visual
It's
person.
not. It's not close to who
Laurie,
their characters are, and it changes how
likes nice clothes, and well, in the modern context, he would be a metrosexual, a man who likes to take care of his looks, which is kind of opposite to my man Fritz. There are times when Jo makes fun of Laurie, like he likes to buy nice clothes and fancy gloves, and Jo laughs about it because why are you spending your money in these irrelevant things? So she doesn't really have much appreciation for Laurie taking care of his looks. And one of my friends pointed out that all the three couples have their own special aesthetics, so to speak. Like John and Meg, they have this whole cottagecore aesthetic. And with Jo and Friedrich, they are not too picky. Jo was that kind of person who didn't really romanticize life, even though Jo and Fritz are a very romantic couple, like you said. But Jo was never a very visual person in Little Man. It's all.
Hello, friends. It is Niina from the Little Woman podcast. Just to let you all know that the Little Woman podcast episode transcripts are now available as books. You can find them as paperbacks and ebooks. They are wonderful reading for all the fans of Louisa May Alcott. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show.
It's like she and Fritz have this mutual agreement that Plumfield is going to be this topsy-turvy, upside-down place. If boys' sticky hands make places dirty, that's okay. And we can have pillow fights once a week so they can release their energy. And then it's completely different in the Lawrence house because Amy and Laurie, they like to have these fancy balls and dinner parties and things to be visually pleasing. And I always thought that Amy and Laurie were a match made in heaven because him being a metrosexual, for example, was something that Amy found visually pleasing. And of course, Jo found Friedrich very attractive. I really love that scene when Amy and Laurie are in Europe and he pats his hand and says, "This is like a lady's hand. You haven't done any work in your life." And Amy knows the struggles of being poor, and Laurie doesn't have any experiences of that. And then Amy says that Jo hates lazy people. And Amy herself also hates lazy people. And that is Laurie's wake-up call. That's when he turns from a boy into a man. Oh, that scene is never in any Little Woman adaptations between 1933 and 2019. Then if we think about Louisa May Alcott, she worked as a nurse in the war. She took care of sick people. She saw bodies lying around. She wasn't squeamish, maybe because she didn't really consider herself very attractive always. And that also had to do with her illness. When you read Little Woman, there is sometimes criticism the way people tend to pay more attention to the way things look outside than the way they look inside. You know what I mean. Jo is not a very visual person.
I almost forgot about the pillow fight. I was like, oh, that's so adorable. But yeah, each relationship worked out for each of them in the best way. Friedrich and Jo are a little bit more like, oh, let's just do whatever suits us at whatever time. And Laurie and Amy are like this people who are like, we have to have dinner ready by 5 every day because we just have to. No earlier, no later. But it works for them because that is the lifestyles that they want. And if you have someone like Jo who is like, let's just eat whenever, whatever. And Laurie is like, no, I want to have this specific time with this specific meal. That's going to clash. Again, I think that's what makes how she handles the relationships very well, that it's not even just like, oh, you can trade one sister for another. It's like, no, they're so different. Their relationship with Laurie is so different that it will not have the same outcome as you think that it will. You can't have Laurie just be with Jo and expect it to have the same outcome as Laurie and Amy. It just won't, not at all. And it's funny, like this is in some ways it's a story of like opposites attracting as well as people who are similar attract. Like you often hear people say differently, like he was someone who is completely different from you, but then you have some people who are like, get someone that is completely the same to you. And I gotta find the passage, but I think Marmee kind of said it perfectly. This is when Jo wants to leave for New York, and Marmee says, oh, I think it's not just because of you wanting to leave, it's also because of Laurie. I gotta find it, but she says that as friends, you are very happy and your frequent quarrels soon blow over. I fear that you both would rebel if you made it so light. You are too much alike and too fond of freedom, not to mention hot-tempered and strong wills to get on halfway with each other in relation that needs infinite patience and forbearance as well as love. So on one hand, the fact that they are very similar is going to be detrimental to them. That would ruin their relationship, because really what makes a relationship work is what is similar about the two of you is your morals, your points of views on some of the bigger topics of things and of your interests. But you need to be different enough to allow some sort of growth to happen. Because if you have two people who are exactly the same and have the same sort of ways of living life, there's a very slim chance, I think, of them progressing into something more deep and meaningful. I think, it's going to be a very kind of like, what do you want to do today? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. And then just you do nothing. Versus if you get someone that is at the very least a little different from you and you go, I don't know. What do you want to do? And it's like, well, why don't we do something a little different and out of our comfort zone? And let's do it. Let's go. Like, I think that in a way they both have that, like you said, Amy pushed Laurie to be more responsible and to sort of realize like what a grown up he needs to be. And Friedrich kind of helped ground Jo and be, and not to say like he tells her like you can still have that dream, like you can still be a writer, you can do it, I believe that you can. In a way, they both, Amy and Friedrich, are what Jo and Laurie need, because in some ways they ground them, but also give them what it is that they need, not necessarily what they want. Laurie thinks what he wants is a housewife that is just going to do what he wants him to do. What he needed was a wife that is like, you know what, you could stand to do a few chores around this house. I think that's why some people feel like have that idea of like Jo and Laurie would be great together because they're so similar, but like therein lies the problem. They're too similar and they're too like a reflection of each other. And I think if you spend too long and too often with someone that is just like you're going to see some of the more negative stuff about yourself and you're not going to like it. You're going to hate how you are as a person. And then you're going to maybe start resenting that person because you recognize some of the more negative stuff about yourself. You're like, you know what, I can grow and learn from this. But the person that you're with has not done the same. And you're like, I'm moving ahead and you're staying right there. We want different things. And so, yeah, I think no matter what, Jo and Laurie's relationship would have ended into the disaster because one will grow and the other will not. And you can't have a relationship where you're not going together somewhere. If you eat, whether it's the both of you stay in the one place or one stays and one goes.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you said that, Jo and Frick, they don't really have any reasons to argue. Henry and Louisa, what I read, they have this sort of telepathic way of communication that they would understand each other without words. I think you can see some of that in Little Woman, in Jo and Friedrich's, the way they communicate. Like you said, well, they are probably the they probably have the least problems in communication when it comes to the different couples in Little Woman because they know each other so well. So it's really interesting that Louisa and Henry would have this sort of telepathic rapport between one another. And, even though Louisa had temper tantrums, Henry was, what I read, quite a peaceful person and didn't really care too much about arguing. I mean, I think it brings another extra layer to Little Woman and to Jo and Friedrich's relationship. I think you can see a lot of that in Little Men, especially when they have this sort of teasing conversation between one another. Well, they really don't argue a lot in the sequels, and if they don't argue in Little Woman, why would they argue? They really don't. They don't have any big conflict. Her and Laurie are the ones who have the conflict. And even with Meg and John, well, I think there was a reason for that argument. And after that, they were a better couple. Meg realized she had problems with leaving behind this idea, but she did wish that sometimes they would have more money. And John realized that, well, Meg has more needs.
It's a growing thing, it's not easy. I mean, I've not yet had to have been in a relationship, but talking between my friend and seeing my sister go through some of her relationships, it's a growing thing, You gotta learn each other's idiosyncrasies, and you gotta learn, like, what does it mean to have another person in your life that is so close to you, It's just like when people say, like, when they have kids, they have that realization of, like, oh, I just have realized that it's not going to just always be about me. Sometimes it's about them. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily are sacrificing the overall picture of what you want for them, but just kind of taking a step back and going, like, I got to realize that even though I approach this situation this way, it doesn't work when I go with this person of whom I am living with and love and whatnot. So yeah, I think that with Meg and John, because they were already so shy with each other in the beginning of their relationship, that it took a little bit more time for them to sort of understand what does it really mean to be in love and to be married. They're such an underrated Little Women couple. It's such a sweet little romance that's like, they love each other, and, like, watching them kind of blossom into these developed parents who truly care for their children, surprisingly being a lot more hands-on than you'd expect any man from that time period to be hands-on with their kids. But yeah, it really goes to show that, marriage is not always as easy as one would think.
In Little Woman, when there was the catfishing sequence, I think there was a moment when afterwards Meg was like looking that Laurie wasn't going to do any kind of jokes with John. She was keeping an eye on him more closely because she didn't want nothing bad to happen to John. I think I would do the same if that happened to me. John is really underrated character. Like, I always love that scene when they're in the Camp Lawrence and he's defending Meg being a teenage governess. And he's like, oh, these American girls, then if are not legging too. So, such a great scene.
I don't really think that moment in particular is really seen in any version. I mean, we do have certain versions that do have, like, the beach/boating scene and those, like, first hints of, like, I don't have any family to worry about. Meg being like, oh no, well, I would miss you if something were to happen. Like, it's precious. And, the fact that he is so patient with her, because, like, he knows that he loves her, but, he knows that maybe Meg isn't fully sure, but he's not pressuring her in the same way that the way Laurie would have. He just is like, it's all right. I'll wait if you'd like. And I'm always here if you do realize that you do love me. But that's okay. You take your time. You do what you gotta do. Like, he is still such a sweet character, and the fact that he just wants Meg to be happy, even at the sacrifice of getting a new coat for her to get a dress is just so sweet. And it's such a big moment for Meg to kind of be like, you know what? I don't need a dress. I just need you. And it's such a lovely little relationship that really doesn't get as much love as the other two comparatively. And I think that's a shame.
Both Friedrich and John, they feel parallel in that sense that they both feel at some point that they are not worthy of this woman. With John is that Meg has all the pressure to marry a rich guy because she is the prettiest of the sisters. And especially Aunt Marge wants her to marry some rich man. And then there is that rumor going on that Meg has something going on with Laurie. And Mom is really mad about it, and which is understandable. But I think John also felt that he was too poor for her. Because, Meg came from a poor family too. He didn't felt that he could give what she needed. That's also one of the reasons why he waited for her. I love that scene in Little Woman when Friedrich feels that he's not worthy of Jo, but it's also because he thinks that Jo is engaged to Laurie, and he can only base his views on Laurie to what Jo has told him, which is not a lot, annoyed that he's this rich neighbor and Jo's best friend. And that's pretty a lot when you're in love with this girl. And you hear that, okay, are they engaged? And he doesn't know that. And then he's so happy when he comes to Concord a year later, and then he finds out that Amy and Laurie are married. Jo is available.
Like, I always kind of, again, props to the 1970 version, as flawed as it is, they do handle that scene exactly as I kind of imagined it in the book, where, like, he's like, oh, yes, you're the friend. Hi, nice to meet you. And Laurie's like, oh, yeah, this is my wife. And he's like, oh, you're married. Okay, well, we can be friends. Like, now there's nothing holding me back from, But the fact that he was willing to gracefully kind of step aside for Jo, if that was the case, is very endearing too. Like, it's only until after he realizes that Laurie is married to Amy and is not at all with Jo that he's like, oh, okay, now I can finally say my feeling, which is very true with every version. Like, when he finds out that there is no Jo and Laurie, it's like, okay, now I can finally say what I feel. Otherwise, before I was just willing to internalize it and just make me feel sad forever. Poor Friedrich. He was willing to do that for Jo if that was what she had wanted, but that ended up working well for everyone.
Such a nice scene where he's like, oh, and then the narrator mentions how Laurie thought he was nice. It's a really funny scene. I really love the whole courting episode in the novel. He always wants what's best for Jo.
Again, it sort of makes me go like, oh, you two idiots, you love each other. Like how, they always seem to be just happening to meet up at the same spot. Like, oh, I didn't see you there. Maybe I'll go with you to see your sister. And maybe I'll come home for a spot of coffee. I mean, not that I was waiting to see you. Jo being all like, Friedrich, oh, I mean the professor, his coffee this way. Like, it's very clear to everyone except to each other, it would seem that you are madly in love. But, like, I guess love makes you share one brain cell in this case. But then it leads to probably one of the most romantic scenes ever, with them just taking shelter of each other under an umbrella and saying how much they just love each other. Just all comes out in this moment of, I believe you're going away, and that makes me sad. It's like, oh, I'm not going away. I promise I won't leave you. I love you too much. Like, it's just, I love it. I love that scene so much.
It's a really romantic proposal.
And nothing to give you but a full heart and empty hands, and the whole her taking his hand saying not empty now. It's like, this is true classic romanticism, when people talk about like Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy holding Lizzie's hand, and people want to say Jo and Friedrich are not romantic. How dare you? You must not have read or watched that scene properly.
It's like when people say that Jo and Friedrich are not passionate enough. Then in the umbrella chapter, he's holding his face, crying, and then he asks her, "Why are you crying?" And then she's like, "'Cause you're going away." And then we find out that he has been keeping Jo's poem with him for months and months. And they pretty much start to make out right after the proposal.
Right. And the fact that Jill, is the one who pretty much jumps on Friedrich, the fact that despite the fact they're in the middle of a muddy road is like, I just got to kiss you because I can't hold it in, and just them making out while people are passing them and it rains and their clothes are all muddy. Like, who cares? They got to kiss here and now. Who cares who sees and whatnot? And particularly for back then, that was so scandalous.
Yeah, in the 19th century, it wasn't really seen as appropriate to have such public expression of affection. I read in another Louisa May Alcott novel, in the Verb Story of Experience, because there's the moment when David, who is once again based on Henry David Thoreau, when he confesses his feelings for Christine, who is the protagonist, he almost has the similar blurt that Friedrich has in the umbrella chapter, that he's been holding all these feelings inside and then he just lets it all out there when he confesses his love for her. And I think, something that Louisa kind of recycles in the stories. I think there's something similar in Rose in Bloom, when Mac confesses his feelings to Rose. When I read about Henry, he's quite similar to Friedrich in that sense, that he would take his time to think things through before he would express his opinion or something that he really wanted to say. There's a lot of descriptions about him that he was sort of more of a deep thinker, and then also in some ways very passionate person. Yeah, I think some of that must have come from Louis' own experiences.
Oh my goodness.
Well, thank you, Christina, for joining me. This was lots of fun.
Yes, and thank you for inviting me. I've never been a part of a podcast before, so this is very exciting for me. And I hope that the listeners get a chance to, enjoy it as much as I did.
You can find you at Tumblr from the Jo and Friedrich blog. It's a great blog. People go and read it.
Thank you.
That was our chat for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and make good choices. Bye.